Hi, Emross.
Hi, Eric. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Am I the only one on today?
Well, so far, folks usually trickle in here, so
Okay, great.
welcome.
Thank you. I was gonna get the premium treatment if I was the only one.
Yeah, it's happened before. Um,
Cool.
yeah, we'll let folks trickle in here. Let
Sure.
me get these folks in here. Hello, May.
Hey.
Hi, Sharon. I should just auto let people in. I should probably just configure that. All right. Anyway, some new faces here. We'll let folks trickle in. Um, I really do need to configure that so it just lets people in. Hey, David, Noel,
Hi, I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute. This is Sharon.
you're good. Hey, Sharon. Hi, Milika? Who am I?
Hello, yes. Hi, Eric. It's Melissa.
Melissa, sorry. All right, cool. We're letting folks in here. While I'm partially my while my attention is partially to letting people in, we should probably get started. Want to make good use of your guys' time. So, I see some new faces here. My name's Eric. I've been affiliated with, not formally affiliated, but I've been a participant and a moderator with the NSA over the past year with two job search councils. And over the past 12 years, I've been in recruiting, primarily for venture-backed startups, everything from executive down to rank and file. Um, and in a former life, I was in software product development, product management, and in a former life, I uh, I studied mechanical engineering and I have a background in engineering. Um, and now, like many folks, I'm kind of in the transition. I think recruiting is like a lot of disciplines is gonna be upended in many ways, and so I'm transitioning from recruiting into building systems that help recruiters and folks that are uh, w- uh, folks that are in sales. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. I do this once a week. It's pretty open-ended as far as the structure, just sort of AMA. Happy to talk about anything. Um, I don't claim to have all the answers, but what I think the perspective that I add value in is really a recruiter's perspective, the recruiter mindset, and sort of that black box that's behind the scenes. And I think what's interesting now is that that black box is evolving a bit. And so, anyway, I'm hoping that I can still lend some timeless insight into the recruiter mindset, the hiring manager mindset, and just how a lot of those dynamics work. Really, with the aim of helping you navigate your job search more effectively. And in many ways, that starts with maybe tempering your expectations a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes, right? So anyway, that's a little bit about me, and happy to just dive right into questions. If anybody has questions, you could just blurt it out or drop it into the chat, and we can go from there.
Okay, so how should I, as a job seeker, try to vet the messages that are coming in through LinkedIn to determine if it's a legitimate recruiter or if it's some sort of scam? And I just went down a total rabbit hole today and yesterday of trying to figure out if this person was real. And the general conclusion was probably not, but maybe so. And then in talking to him, seems like, yeah, probably a real person with a real job. Just there were a number of things that were sort of yellow flags for those that I was talking to try to vet this. So curious from your
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, may I ask just for a little bit of context? Like what did that person reach out to you via email, SMS, LinkedIn message?
LinkedIn message.
Okay, so there was probably a profile associated with that LinkedIn message outreach.
Yeah, the profile had no picture attached to it. It
Yeah.
did say what the company was. They did have several thousand followers. There's nobody that recommended him. He
Mm,
recommended one other person. There were a number of job posts on there. The company itself says that he's been with it for 7 years, and there is a website. Um, and there are like, here's our team with a number of their pictures and titles, including down to um, leads, which is not a
yeah.
very high title. So the fact that he wasn't on there was also not great. And then I called the office and they said, what's the name? Oh, yeah, I work with him all the time. I'm like,
Mm,
okay, that's great. Like, why isn't he on here? But
yeah. Yeah. So I can't, I mean, there's obviously a lot of scams out there, and I don't know all the sort of
tricks.
angles they're trying to play. I would imagine they're trying to gather information and probably lead you down some rabbit hole. I have no idea, right? I don't know all those games that these scammers might play. But I mean, some of the telltale, right, is that usually a recruiter will have a legitimate LinkedIn profile, especially if they're a recruiter, right? A lot of times they're on LinkedIn and they're sourcing and vetting talent through LinkedIn, so they will have a legitimate profile. No picture is one of the sort of telltales that it's kind of a fake account or account that was created recently for some sort of nefarious purposes. I don't know. But I think it sounds like you did the right things. I mean, I think there's an abundance of great talent out there right now, and it is an employer's market. And so I think a lot of folks that are looking for their next opportunity, they're a little bit vulnerable to some of these scams. You know, anytime a recruiter wants to talk with them or reaches out, there's sort of like this inclination, like, all right, I finally have somebody reaching out to me. I want to talk with this person, but it could, I think to your point, it could be a waste of your time. Did you ever end up getting on a call with the person?
I did. And the other thing is, you'd said the opportunity was with a particular company. So I'd asked a friend who works at that large company, like, does this sound like anything? And he said, okay, well, our company has a bunch of internal recruiters. We don't really use external recruiters. And and I don't see him in the system. So, I mean, he wasn't an employee, so that makes sense. And he's like, I also didn't see a particular position that especially matched this in our system, like not the
Yeah,
title or that particular description. And usually the jobs are written like, here's our company culture, here's what it's like to work for us, here's the job responsibilities, et cetera, et cetera. And
yeah,
so I did get on a phone call with him just before this call, and he said, he had also emailed me notes, like I provided my name and number, and then just went down the rabbit hole of, oh my God, is this going to end up on the dark web now? No response for like
yeah,
overnight. And he emailed me back the job description, was like, it's pretty long, so I'll just email it. It had some typos from getting copied and pasted over. And he's like,
mhm,
okay, here's parts that were his notes that he took on the call with the hiring manager. And then there was a portion that he'd taken from the hiring manager. So I said, hey, it seems to have two different sections of basic qualifications. And he's like, oh, I think the manager was just like typing up some notes. And so he had two different sets and basically like user
yeah,
error on that front that he passed along. But we talked about the role like fairly briefly, and he's like, okay, I feel comfortable recommending you for the role if you want to apply further. So, the next step
yeah.
is to customize your resume with these priorities, and then I need to send you a right to represent form. So I'm like, okay. So
So, so if the person is a legitimate recruiter, um, there's a game, and I don't use that in a demeaning way, but there's a game that recruiters play, where where they try to partner with high caliber talent that they believe will help them get a shoe in into a client, even before they have a signed agreement with that client, right? So if may you have some sort of special niche kind of experience, I could build a relationship with you, basically represent you, have your resume, know all about you, and then I can go to the sort of the employer marketplace and say, hey, company XYZ, I know that you're hiring for this kind of position. I have a great candidate for you. I would love to send you more information about this person. here's a sort of a redacted resume or whatever. If you like the person, let's get a conversation going. Let's get something signed, right? So they call that sort of a most placeable candidate um, sort of strategy. It's like a business development strategy. So that might be something that's going on, right? If you feel like the person is a legitimate recruiter, maybe obviously it sounds like a third party recruiter because that company you said doesn't work with, they have their own recruiters and it doesn't sound like that person's affiliated with that company, at least from what you can tell.
Yeah, this is third person. Yeah.
Yeah, so that might be what's going on, right? And I would just be cautious about what kind of information you give to the person, right? Your phone number, email, it's fine. I don't know if they need all your, they don't need your address, your social security number. They don't need all that stuff, right?
Okay.
Sometimes applicant tracking systems will require, depending on how they have it set up, some sort of unique identifier of a person. And they shouldn't be using social security number or anything like that. But I would just be very cautious if they're asking you for that kind of information. Anything beyond your email address, your phone number, they don't need to have your address. You could tell them what city you live in, but beyond that, they don't really need that. They don't need social security number, blood type, age. They don't need that.
You'd asked for my month, day, like month, my birth month, day to create the right to represent. And he's like, I need the last four of your social, but just give me any non-consecutive four numbers so I can get that
Yeah,
form.
I
So
think that's fine. I think that's fine. I mean, like I said, like depending on the processes, ATS system or CRM that they're using, they might need some sort of unique identifier to identify you. And so, if it's, some obscure last four of your social, I mean, I think it's okay. But I mean, even the person conceded that, just give me some non-consecutive number that's sort of arbitrary so they can identify you. I think that's fine. But
well, thank you.
yeah.
Well, wish me luck. I'll pass it on to Ms. Ross there because it looks like she has a time crunch. So thank you so much.
All right, no worries.
Yeah,
Miss Ross.
thank you. Hi. I was just gonna say that I wanted to get your take because I've submitted my resume in the past. So I had a contract role at the end of 2023, moved back to the US. I was living overseas, and I had about an 8-to-1 ratio in terms of applications for jobs that I was well qualified for to getting an interview request from recruiters, and I would hear from them within a couple of days of applying. So on some level, they were looking at my resume manually. But unfortunately, this year I was impacted by layoffs, and that number now is, to the sky. And I've gotten one interview from a cold online application. All the other interviews I've gotten were from networking communities that I'm a part of, where I was able
Yeah.
to get my resume in front of the hiring manager directly. And I know it's not an issue with my resume or my experience because putting my resume in front of the hiring manager, I'm getting an interview every time. I mean, I've done
Yeah.
that 4 times for 4 roles
Yeah.
outside the qualifier, got an interview every time. And so my question is like, what's broken now? I mean, it's been a year and it's completely changed. So curious if you know what happened there and why is applying for jobs now useless?
So that ratio 8-to-1, that was a year ago.
Yeah.
I was gonna say if you're experiencing, I was gonna say that's a great that's a great ratio
Yeah.
based on what I've seen and just people I've talked with. So I was like, wow, that's not too much to complain about. But you're saying that number's quite different now. It's to the
Well,
sky.
it's not it's non-existent. I've probably applied to over, close to over 100 roles now. And again, I'm not applying to every role. I'm only applying to roles that I know that I would be like well qualified for. Like, because I only apply to roles that where I know I would be the top candidate, right? Or one of the top candidates. And so,
Yeah.
and I was laid off in March. And so I've applied to a lot by now, right?
Yeah.
And I've gotten one interview request from applications online, from
Yeah.
applications that I do where I'm networking and I have the hiring manager. I'm able to get in every time, but
Yeah.
but this year it's one I've gotten an interview request for.
Yeah. I would venture to say, I'll just ask the group here, is that fairly consistent with what everyone else is seeing with respect to applications? Is it in terms of getting an interview or a callback? are you seeing ratios of like 20 to 1, 50 to 1
Haven't been tracking
more?
the numbers because it's sort of depressing, but I haven't gotten like hardly anything unless it was specifically a person connecting me with the other
Yeah.
person.
Yes, I
Yeah.
agree. An internal referral where it works, like the companies that are actually receptive to that, is the only way that I've gotten through. I've had
See?
zero return on a cold application.
Yeah.
Right. And even on the internal referrals I have, those haven't gotten me in.
Well, so but what I have found is there are companies, and I'll freely name drop like Airbnb,
Yeah.
Atlassian,
Yeah.
REI. They are not valuing internal referrals. They have
Yeah.
way too. They had, their
Yeah.
cold applicant pool is now the same as their internal
Right.
referral applicant pool, and so
Right.
they can't make heads and tails of it. So they're like, guys, stop referring internally. They're actively discouraging their employees to do that. So that's what I meant by you got to find where an internal referral holds some kind of weight still. And I've just been putting all my effort there. So it's one of the criteria like for applying, must have internal referral.
Yeah. I see in the chat here, David, 50 to 1, 100 to 1, Noel, 100 to 1. So 8 to 1 is amazing, and I know that's not happening right now, it sounds like, but and I could spend some time speculating, but I think right now it's really an employer's market, and a lot of folks are competing for the same role. You also have a lot of folks that are sort of uh, opting for roles that are smaller than what they previously had.
But even
So
for roles that are like, like I don't have any pretense about my seniority. Like if the job is a good fit for my skills and experience. And so like even for jobs that I'm like overqualified for, I'm not hearing back from. And I'm
yeah,
going, okay, what's going on? So what broke? What happened? Do you have any insight into that, Eric?
I can speculate, right? Like there's a
Sure.
lot of interesting things going on with the economy right now. There's a lot of different forces at play, right? I mean, venture capital is, at least for us, right? So venture capital was a huge, I mean, the activity in venture capital was a huge sort of driver for work for us, right? I run a third-party recruiting firm. Over the
Mm,
past 12 years, venture capital was flowing. Well, minus the past year and a half, 2 years, right? Venture capital was flowing. Companies were getting funded. And when they
yeah.
fund, they have to invest. And they invest typically in hiring, expanding their team. So business was very good for us prior to the last 2 years.
Hmm.
And so, so when money is flowing and investors are investing and companies are investing and people are hiring, the world kind of goes round and round. But I mean, I think that's one thing that I've seen in terms of our business drying up, right? Um,
What?
and then, yeah, and then I mean, there's other forces too, right? Like, the adoption of AI is becoming more prevalent now, and companies are starting to get how it could be used. And if not companies, individuals in their specific roles are understanding how it can be used to amplify their capabilities and their capacity,
Yeah,
right?
I work in AI actually. I'm AI
Yeah.
product manager, and so I use AI to optimize my resume, optimize my search. And I'm wondering if on the flip side, what's happening is recruiters are using AI to find the candidate. But like all of those tricks that you heard about, like aligning your language to the role, like all of that stuff, useless. So what happened? Like how are they deciding who they're interviewing? And why is it never me anymore?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough right now, right? So one dynamic that's happening is recruiters are being asked to do more with less,
Yeah,
especially as
right,
teams streamline, right? So
right.
recruiter in the past may be handling 5 to 10 requisitions. Now they might be handling double that, right?
Yeah,
Depending whether they're internal, external,
yeah,
what have you, right? And so
right.
recruiters are being asked to do more with less, and the amount of applications and resumes per posted requisition,
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy, right? Hundreds,
Right,
hundreds of
right,
applicants, hundreds. And so
right,
as a recruiter, how do you handle all that,
right.
right? So there's different channels to get to a recruiter,
Mm,
right? There's a front door. You apply on the website. You
mhm.
apply maybe through a job post,
Yeah, right,
right? Indeed, LinkedIn, whatever.
right.
And that all sort of aggregates into sort of their inbound stack. But if you're a recruiter, how do you how do you manage that? Okay, so you might also get through side channels, right? Maybe a hiring manager knows somebody or somebody knows somebody within the company and it gets a little bit of priority, right? So they have that stack too. And to Melissa's point, those side channels are becoming more and more how do you say inundated, right? They're just more flush with recommended applicants or recommend internal referrals, right? And so that's becoming even more saturated for the recruiter. So what does a recruiter do? Like, so like if you can get to a recruiter directly, assuming the recruiter has some influence, and that's a whole other thing, right? Recruiters come in all shapes and sizes, right? Ideally, you have a recruiter that has line of sight to the hiring manager, and if they have line of sight, they typically have some, especially if they're senior, they have some meaningful influence in your candidacy, right? A lot of times they're like the gatekeeper, right? And they're sort of proxy for the hiring manager. But if you can get to the recruiter, right, for the specific position, that would be ideal, right? Because then you can build a relationship. They can be an advocate on your behalf, blah, blah, blah. They can help you navigate internally too, because depending on the company, they might have different departments, right? And they're usually a good recruiter will have sort of that credibility internally, and their endorsement is respected. What else could be happening? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. It's just there's a lot of companies that are just they're waiting to hire, right? They're especially in in early stage startups. We had a potential client that was so hot on bringing us on board, us, our recruiting firm, to get them to start building their sales team, and then they backed out sort of the last minute, and we were just like, "What's going on?" We had no idea what was going on, and they were like, "Well, our growth wasn't what it was expected, and so." Let's regroup in 3 to 6 months. Okay, fine. We'll regroup in 3 to 6 months. So we're experiencing a similar thing, from a business development standpoint for a recruiting firm, right? There's things are slow. Things are slow. So part of it I think is you're not alone. You're not alone in this, right? You're not getting singled out. Um, Chances are you're probably not even getting seen. And so yeah, I mean, my sort of overarching recommendation is if you can get to the right person, and there's all kinds of different tricks to do that. If you can get to the right person and they could be an advocate on your behalf, and typically that's a recruiter, right? Because a lot of times if you can get to a hiring manager, that's even more power to you, right? So, or if you can get to an executive that has influence over a hiring manager,
Right.
that could be another way, right?
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it.
So, yeah.
Eric, I have a question. So, I have a couple interviews and they're kind of at the later stage. And so th- I, I'm expecting I might potentially get an offer from one of those soon. But I do have some kind of obligation in maybe 4 or 5 months into the job. If I were to start, I may not
So,
be
sorry, say that
available.
again. I didn't
So
understand that.
like let's say if I accept the job and then like maybe 4 or 5 months down the road, I might not be available. And so I'm just thinking, like, do I communicate that during the negotiation? Uh, or it do I, or if I were to communicate it, how do I kind of communicate that without jeopardizing the
So,
offer?
just so I understand, so if you were to get an offer and you were to accept it, you're saying that 5 or 6 months down the line, you wouldn't be available? What does that mean? Like you're going on
Just like I
vacation?
won't be available for like a period of time.
Is this for professional reasons, personal reasons, or
Personal.
personal reasons? And is that something you could disclose to them?
That's
You'd
the
feel
thing.
comfortable?
I don't know if I sh like I don't know if they will kind of think poorly of me because like okay, like you just started the job and then like you'll be gone for a little bit and
What's a
um
little bit, like a week or a month, two
maybe a
months,
couple
3 months?
of months.
Oh, wow. Okay. Um, and there's no workaround around that. Like it's pretty, you have to
I mean,
take that.
I think I can be flexible with it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a tough situation. I'm just so as a recruiter, if I came across a candidate that I was excited about that we wanted to extend the offer to, um, you know, 3 months or, you know, on the order of a few months within the first 6 months or a year, I think that's a lot to ask,
Mm-hmm.
you know. I mean, obviously it depends on the company, but usually, I mean, if you've been there for a while, right? If you've been there for 12 months and you're able to build that sort of professional and social capital with the
Right.
team, with your hiring manager, then it's not completely out of the question. But, you know, as a candidate that's getting an offer, potentially getting an offer, you have very limited social and professional capital. So as a recruiter, that would be a huge ask, especially if you
Mm-hmm.
cannot disclose the reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's a reason that you could share, you could disclose with them, and you know, depending on who they are, the company or whatnot, they might work with you on it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times that's only after you've demonstrated your basically your credibility within the company, right? And to do
Right.
that like right off the bat, um, I mean, I'll just be very honest with you. Like if I had three candidates and you know maybe you were number one, I have a number two, and I have a number three,
Mm-hmm.
and I was okay, we'll extend an offer to her. And if at some point we find out that you have to take off 3 months, let's say, in 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a risk.
Yeah.
That would be a risk. So and I assume this is a
Yeah.
full-time
Yeah. Full
W-2
time.
position. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So so from a recruiter perspective, it's a bit of a risk, right? And
Yeah.
I can't see many hiring managers. Um, I what I could see is them saying, okay, well, who's next in line? Who's number
Right.
two?
Right. Okay.
You know, so I mean that's a personal decision you'd need to make in terms of what you disclose to them and at what
Right.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Understood.
yeah.
Okay. Thank
Hmm. Oh, I see some activity here in the chat. Let's see, Corey, how effective is reaching out to hiring managers related to your industry via LinkedIn? I thought about reaching out to them via email. They have listed in their contact info, but I'm concerned about crossing a boundary. No, so I would. So first of all, I don't think you'd be crossing a boundary if you reached out to a publicly available email, especially if their available email is on LinkedIn. There's a reason they're putting it out there. I would just be smart about how you're reaching out. Yeah, and I think I've said this before. You know, recruiters get people reaching out to them all the time. So the typical outreach message is usually an ask. Hey, do you have 20 minutes? Um, you know, can you jump on a Zoom call with me? So it's usually an ask. And I guess part of what I can share with you here is like, is what I usually see as a recruiter, right? That way you can know what other people are doing and how you can kind of differentiate yourself. And my recommendation is always to sort of lead with value and lead with something that interrupts the pattern. Because the pattern is most candidates, most jobs, um, folks that are looking for the next position, they're leading with, hey, you know, I see you're hiring for this position. You know, I'd love to chat with you a little bit more about it. You know, that's very common. It's very common. And so right off the bat, you're making an ask. And so so I don't yeah, Corey, I don't think it's crossing a line. You just have to be smart about how you approach. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-on question to that? If it's not an ask, like if you're not emailing for an ask, what's a way to email for like a give or something, you know?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't start with an email. I would start with engaging with that person's content.
Oh, on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Because
Oh,
chances are they've either written their own content, like posts, or they've engaged with other people's posts. Find out what they're engaging with and jump into the conversation and add value in that conversation. You know, the value could be like, you know, a unique perspective, an insight, something that demonstrates, you know, your thought leadership, and they'll start to see your name, right? So I wouldn't even start with just an email, right? Maybe that you got to prime them a little bit, right? So just figure out, like, stalk them, figure out what they're
yeah.
posting, you know, figure out if they're on X, Twitter, figure out where they're hanging out digitally, and then go be there.
Yeah, that's smart. Thank you for the advice. Thank you.
Yeah. Then you can follow up with an email. And then so you can follow up with an email that you can reference sort of the comment or their post or whatever, right? Most people aren't doing this. That's the thing. They see that hiring manager, oh, this person's a hiring manager of the company I want to work for. Oh, I see their email is posted. Oh, I'm just going to shoot them an email. And then you don't have much to say in the email, right? But at least if you can reference something like, oh, we met at a party, right? And that party happened to be a conversation in a LinkedIn post or something, right? Like that's the party. Or we met at a party, right? Right. So I would think about those kinds of things. You got to prime them a little bit, and they'll start to recognize your name, right? Because recruiters see names all the time. So if they can see your name a few times before that email, they'll start to associate, and they'll give you more of a second look. Let's see what else. Feel free to jump in, anyone, if you guys have questions. I heard this is from May. I heard companies can get so many candidates in their first day that they just stop looking after that time. Depends on the company. They might still continue to look, though candidates close it when there are too many applicants. Another opinion is that if it's an internal referral, that will still get read, so it's worth waiting for the referral to go through. Probably some relevance to both opinions. So yeah, there is a time sensitivity about job requisitions, right? When a job requisition gets posted, usually the recruiter is cycling through other requisitions and posting them. And so they'll post something and they'll move on to the next thing, and they'll let the inbound sort of build up to some point until they have time to go back to it. So there's a sense of urgency, and there is such thing as job requisitions postings getting stale. So if a job posting's been out there for, I don't know, a month or two, it's probably pretty stale. And the only reason that a recruiter would go back to a stale pipeline, assuming that they only have one position, is if that first cohort that they cycled through didn't pan out. Right? So job descriptions, job postings, they do get stale. So time is of the essence. If you see something that is interesting and it's been posted first day, 2, 3 days, whatever, it makes sense to get in sooner rather than later, relatively speaking. No callback guaranteed, right? A friend of mine made a super warm intro to a startup founder, and I think they're afraid of hiring right now. Yeah. It's a problem over the past, whatever, decade. I think a lot of companies, um, they hired a lot of folks, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now is that a lot of these companies are slimming down, and there's just a lot of apprehension about the future.
Eric, I appreciate your time. This is the first time that I've joined live, but I've been reading the
Awesome.
recaps, and I've heard chatter from other friends in the NSA. Do you have time for one more question, or I could save it for
Yeah,
next session?
certainly.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
so I was fortunate enough to have made it through the interview process and was a finalist. And I knew that the recruiter needed until sort of after the Memorial Day holiday to come back with sort of, the official response. And it had taken a bit of time. So I went ahead and reached out for a status update, like on a Thursday. And
Yeah.
within 15 minutes, I got an auto rejection. And I was like, no, like I've spent, of course, nothing was guaranteed. But I had positive signals. And then I get this kind of, flat canned message. So I had separately messaged the recruiter and said, oh, I see the update, regardless of outcome. I'm happy to have met so many wonderful people of the team. Because I'm trying to improve myself, I would love some feedback, if it's available. And of course, it's been 2 weeks and I have not heard anything, no
Yeah.
acknowledgement whatsoever. So I guess in the spirit of managing my own expectations, what do you think?
Yeah, that's tough. I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't catch that. What was the signal the person gave to you before the holiday weekend?
Well, she had been responsive, and I had completed the interview process about a week before Memorial Day, and she was like, "Here," probably had responded to my initial email, like, I don't know, within a couple of hours, saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
we're wrapping up interviews, and we're gonna make a decision, and you should hear back from me." It happened to be the Friday before the holiday, but of course, I know that
Okay.
can be a little crazy and everything like that. But I guess the
Yeah.
positive signals were just that, hey, I had met so many people from the company, had good like rapport in the conversations, moved on to the other rounds of the interview,
Yeah.
and then completed it fairly efficiently, like in like 2.5 weeks. And I did have an internal referral, and unprompted, my internal connection had said, "Hey, I've heard great things. Fingers crossed." So
Yeah.
these are the positive. It's the sum of
Yeah.
these positive signals.
Yeah. Wow, that's a bummer. I mean, especially with all these positive signals and then just to get a canned auto reply. Sorry, I'm sorry to hear that. Can I ask you a question? So
Yeah.
during this 2.5 weeks that you were interviewing with the company, um, was there any other feedback that you received beyond
No, I mean,
like
I had asked, the classic question at the end of each conversation, like, "Hey, based on what we've talked about, is there anything that's worth clarifying, or
yeah.
do you think there's an area where I don't meet the qualifications for the role?" And nothing.
And tell me about your recruiter. Was it an internal recruiter, an external
Yes.
recruiter?
Yep. Internal.
Internal. And that person was your basically your main point of contact that was shepherding you through through the process.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they had some funky like automated scheduling things where she ended up, stepping away, and they let the kind of bot do that. But that's normal. Yeah. Otherwise, she was the main point of contact. Yep.
And did you have any sense of, I assume that this was for an open position with a single head count.
Uh,
Sorry, let me,
yes. And over time, the idea was that they would add more senior. This was like a senior version of
okay,
a role. Yeah.
okay. And did you have any sense of where you were
No,
in the bigger scheme of things? Like,
no, I didn't know how many people were being interviewed. I just know that I had applied within one day,
hmm
um, and I had this internal referral, and everything went pretty quickly. There was even like an AI, um, a video like through Higher View. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where,
yeah,
yeah, you're asked some questions on video, and then you're meant to record your responses and play some games. So I had even
yeah,
gone through that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing that I would recommend is trying to solicit feedback throughout the process, right? And
Mm,
one way that you can solicit feedback is obviously you can ask questions about your candidacy, specific to your candidacy, right? Which it
yeah.
sounds like you're doing, right?
Hmm.
And I would recommend doing that throughout the process. The other thing, sort of the other sort of level that you can ask questions about to get a sense, and maybe if this person is kind of shy or coy about sharing this information, you can kind of maybe leverage your friend, your the person that your colleague that is making the
Hmm.
internal referral, right? Because they might have some insight. But some of the questions that would help me as a candidate is to have that perspective, right? So the questions are, is this the first time you're hiring for this role? That's one question, right? Because that's telling. If it's the first time they've ever hired for this role at the company, like maybe it's a
Hmm.
new role. Maybe they just created the role a few weeks ago and now they're trying to fill it. And this role never existed in the past.
Hmm.
The reason that's important is because if they've never hired for the role before, they're going to churn through candidates as part of
Sure,
the learning
sure.
curve, right?
Yep, that makes
And
sense.
it's good to know that if you might be part of that churn, right? So that's one question you can ask. The other question that you can ask is that, well, it kind of aligns with this. Is this a backfill position? Like, did somebody leave? Were they fired? And you're
Hmm.
trying to backfill it,
Hmm.
right? And then you can start getting into the question like, why did they leave?
Hmm.
You know?
Somebody was internally promoted.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, was that the
Hmm.
your situation?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. So that's good to know. Somebody's internally promoted. That's encouraging. It can
Yep.
be encouraging, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I presume that you might have even interviewed with that person that got promoted.
I don't think so, although that would have made sense.
Yeah,
But
that would be cool to know, right? As a
yeah.
candidate, because like, what does it take to get promoted? How long have they been in the company? How do they like it? Blah blah blah. You can ask
Hmm.
all those questions. The other thing too is like, how long has the position been open, and have they cycled through previous cohorts?
Hmm.
So if the position is new and they've never hired for the position before, it's possible that they've cycled through a previous cohort, and it's possible that they've recalibrated what it is they're looking for, and now they're on to cohort 2
Hmm.
or cohort
Hmm.
3 even,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's good to know these things, right? Because then you could start asking more pointed questions about what was the change. Like, so if you find that you were part of cohort 2 and the first cohort didn't pan out, why didn't it pan out? Did they make offers and they were all rejected? Why were they rejected? So part of it is, I know that a lot of people can be shy about asking some of these questions. Um, but if a person started asking me those questions as a recruiter, I would not be offended because it would
Hmm.
tell me they're kind of astute to how this works. And if they're astute to how this works, the benefit to me as a recruiter is that they might even be able to help me as part of this process of hiring. And how can they help me? They might be able to help me by saving me time, right? So maybe you've hired for this position in the past or a similar position, right? And so you might have insights that the recruiter doesn't have. So it changes sort of the dynamic in terms of me dealing with you as just a candidate versus as a candidate plus, somebody that might be able to partner with me and helping me solve my problem. And my problem as a recruiter is finding the right person and minimizing my risk. So so yeah, just a quick takeaway, like, or the quick recap. I would try to solicit feedback throughout the process, right, and try to get a sense of where you are in the bigger picture, and I certainly wouldn't wait until the end to ask for feedback, and also signal to the person throughout the process that you value candid feedback and you actually do something with it. Because a lot of times I get this a lot as a recruiter. People ask for feedback and it's usually at the end, and you have to understand that there's risk for a recruiter to give you feedback. Like, there's real risk. I've experienced it before. I had a rapport with a candidate. Towards the end, the person was rejected from the they were declined. The person asked for feedback. I provided them with feedback, and the person went off the rails, threatened lawsuit. It was just a big mess, big mess. And so, especially if the company's a little more established and they have certain protocols in place, they're probably being guided by HR, and HR is all risk averse, right? So you have to understand that a lot of recruiters, it's not their fault per se, especially at a more established organization where they have all these protocols in place. They're risk averse to providing you with like meaningful feedback. So to get around that, try to build a rapport throughout the process and signal throughout the process that you value candid feedback and you do something, and you're not going to get offended. You're going to do something meaningful with it to improve growth mindset, all that stuff, right? Because it's just too often that somebody asks for feedback only at the end when they're declined. And then some people want to pick fights, right? So, and recruiters know that, especially if they're guided by HR. Okay, any other questions, situations? Anything in the chat? Yeah, so Chris, I see your comment here. I asked for feedback along the way and they said everything was great. I separately connected with interviewers on LinkedIn and they had a positive response. So yeah, if somebody is telling you that everything is great, that may be their way of just trying to keep you engaged, right? I would try to build sort of a level of rapport. So I'm very transparent, but I expect transparency from the candidates that I work with. And what I mean by that is a lot of times I'll ask, what other companies are you interviewing with? How far along are you in that process? Do you have any offers coming up? Right? If
Mm.
you had to stack rank this opportunity with the two other opportunities you're exploring, how would you stack rank? Right? And so, and why? Right? So I will ask those questions of candidates, hoping for some transparency, and in return, I provide transparency to them. Um, so if you can demonstrate transparency, you should also, as you demonstrate transparency, you should also sort of expect that from them as well.
Mm. Got it. Is there any recommendation you have if uh, you go through the final rounds and it didn't go your way? How to kind of keep the contacts warm? I'm connected to the interviewers through LinkedIn. Is there any sort of is it okay to just reach out to them and say, hey, it didn't go my way, but all the best kind of thing, something like that, or it's generally not a good idea?
You're talking about you have relationships with the hiring managers after that process, for example?
Well, I connected to them through when I was interviewing and I had a follow-up and, I'm connected to them through LinkedIn through the process. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
them from before, but they decided to go with another candidate. So is there a way to kind of leave this in a good place? Like, so I don't, or like, should I just walk off, or like, do you have any recommendations on that?
I mean, walk off is sort of I don't know, a strong expression, but I would certainly try to build relationship, right? I mean, it takes effort, right? So part of it is like figuring out how you allocate your time investment in terms of building relationships, right?
Mm,
So certainly you don't want to burn any bridges, and at the same time, you don't want to spend all your effort building a bridge that goes nowhere, right?
yeah, yeah,
So so you have to sort of, it's a judgment call you have to make. But certainly, I mean, I don't think it would hurt to reach out to the hiring manager and just sort of remind them that, if it's the case that you had a great experience interviewing with them and, I don't know, I'd love to add you as somebody in my network or whatnot,
yeah,
and would love to stay in touch. If that's the case, right? I mean, maybe it's not the case, right?
yeah,
And if you feel like there's somebody maybe in your network that you think would be a good fit if they haven't filled the position, you can offer that as well. Again, that's sort of in the spirit of like leading with value or providing value. And then again, if there, there's I mean, there's no shortage of opportunities to build relationship, but at the same time, it's like you want to make sure that you're allocating your time effectively, right? So
yeah,
what I
yeah.
would do is if you were turned down, just shoot them a quick email or a LinkedIn message, thanking them for their time. And I think most candidates do that. A lot of candidates do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend doing that. And if they are somebody that you respect and you appreciate, and you could envision a long-term relationship with them, because they're in your industry, that you can learn from them. For example, maybe they're where you want to be in a year or two or three or four, right?
Mm, mm,
And so maybe you could build a relationship from that angle.
got it. That's a good advice. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think that's all I've got. Unless you guys have any other questions or ideas or thoughts. All right, cool. Well, it was nice seeing you all. Next time, I hope more folks are on video. I love to see your faces, or I love to see moving heads. All right, you guys have a great week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.